All right. Hello, everyone. So my project is a multimodal business recommendation system. So let's go to the slides. And basically involves predicting where a Yelp user will go next using visual, textual, and spatiotemporal data. So let's look at the prediction task. The term POI here stands for point of interest, which is basically any business that's found in the Yelp dataset. So this can be shops, grocery stores, restaurants, etc. And basically, we're going to be treating every Yelp review as a user visiting a certain business. And for every user U at a given time t, we know its history of all the different places they visited. And there's also additional context such as time, region, text features, image features. These usually come out of the reviews. The goal here is essentially to predict what is the next business they're going to visit. So, given where you've been and where you are right now, we're going to be guessing where you'll go next. So, all these different features, multimodal features, can be taken into account to make an informed prediction. Here is the overall pipeline I'll be using. So we'll be using the Yelp dataset, which I'll talk about later. We have some pre-processing stages that build like sequential data for the user reviews, and this is used in a sequence prediction task. Then we have the models. So our baselines are popularity model and matrix factorization, which comes from class. And then we'll be extending these with the FPMC and a few models that I've made myself, which is a spatiotemporal FPMC and a multimodal transformer. Then we'll go on to ranking the candidates, computing some metrics, and then comparing the models. And the goal here is to essentially get the true next POI to be as highly ranked as possible. So this is a ranking task that we're doing. So how we evaluate this is that we do something called a leave last out protocol. And what this means is that we have a bunch of businesses visited by the user. We essentially take the first couple in a sequence and then use it to predict the very last one or the next last one that the user is going to visit. So that's how we prepare our validation samples as well. So we just remove the last business and then see if our model can predict that. And we care about ranking. So we're going to be have a model that scores all the different businesses and then we sort it, right? So the metrics that we use here are very similar to the ones you've learned in class. These are hit at K and NDCG at K. So these essentially measured whether we got the true POI in the top K and also whether we ranked it high enough. So the NDCG metric that you can see here has this log discounting factor where that encourages the top K that's predicted by the model to be um, as highly ranked as possible in the actual label. This can be used in many applications like real world recommendation to essentially recommend the next businesses that you could visit and Yelp. So the baseline here, so here's like the model ladder. So we have a popularity, which is a very simple model that just recommends the most reviewed business. Then we have matrix factorization, which we learned in class with the user and item latent factors. We have FPMC, which is a personalized one-step Markov chain. And then I am going to extend this with the spatiotemporal embeddings as well. So I'm going to take the FPMC and add additional embeddings for like time, weekday, month, and region. And then we have a multimodal transformer that incorporates like text features, image features, as well as a transformer over sequences. So you can see that the context increases as you keep going down the model ladder to more complex models. When it comes to assessing the validity of the model's predictions, there are a couple of sanity checks in place. So one thing is if you shuffle the timestamps, the metric should drop down because time is an important characteristic. If you remove multimodal features, again, the metrics drop. We again do comparisons against baselines. And the main goal here is to show that as you increase the context and the amount of information, it actually helps and makes the predictions better. So next we'll go into the EDA. So what is the Open Yelp dataset? And this one, let's click on this link, and it's also in the Jupyter notebook as well. So you can kind of go over this. This is section one, and then we have section two right here. Here's a more elaborate description of all the different files that are present inside here. But the main context and story behind this data set is that there was actually in 2013 a challenge that was made by Yelp where they released this educational data set and encourage people to come up with different research prediction tasks in recommender systems. So this has been available on Kaggle, Hugging Face, and a couple of other places as well. And it's mainly a part of that challenge as to how this data set came across from Yelp itself. And when it comes to pre-processing the data, we're going to actually explore this in our Jupyter notebook. So I'm going to move over to the Jupyter notebook. The first step is to convert the JSON into a format called Parquet, which is easier to read into pandas. So it just iterates over all the JSON files and then converts it into this format. Then here is a quick overview of the different data frames. So here's like information about businesses, information about reviews, users, and so on and so forth. One of the most important characteristics here is that this data set is extremely sparse. So you can see that the sparsity that you can calculate here, which is related to how many interactions there are between users and items, the sparsity is very large. So for the total number of users and item combinations you can have, the number of interactions we actually have is pretty small. So this is really important, sparse data sets, just like how we saw in assignment one of this class. Um, and then here are some plots. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So we have like things like star ratings, we have reviews, how many reviews each business gets, distribution of reviews per user, some text characteristics as well, like text length, as well as spatial structure. So you can actually plot out things like latitude and longitude. And a very interesting thing you can see here is that there are some clusters around here. So there are about 11 clusters of locations. And what you can do with this is that you can apply like a basic clustering algorithm from unsupervised learning, like the k-means clustering algorithm that's done right here. And you can use this to essentially cluster them out into separate locations. And these clusters or regions is a useful feature that we can use in our model. Here are some really other cool things I made. One of them is an interactive map where you can kind of zoom in and out on different regions. So you can see all the different clusters around here. You can zoom in on certain locations. Um, and then the other stage of pre-processing is actually building the sequence. So basically what this code does is that it takes all the features we have and then it builds these sequences of, for each user, sequences of going from one business to another, right? And this is essentially the data that we are taking as input to our model. So all the different previous to next interactions are what gets built over here. Um, and then we add our spatio-temporal features as well, like our day, month, cluster region, etc. And then we do a split into train validation and tests. This is like an 80-10-10 split that we do. And the validation set will be used for tuning our hyperparameters. And here are some other plots that I won't spend too much time on. So this is like interaction sequence lengths. Here's a really cool plot that shows you an animation of the number of reviews over time. So you can see that around 2015, 2016, there's like a peak. And then around 2020, when COVID happens, it kind of drops down. So yeah, so that's like an overall idea of how time plays an important role. And the very last part about pre-processing is building textual and and visual features. So for textual features, what I do is that I use a BERT model. So the BERT model basically is a transformer model that's pre-trained, and you pass text into it. It gives you feature vectors that you can use as features for our task. And similarly for visual features, what I do is that I take each photo. I use the ResNet model, which is available in Torch Vision. So this is like a pre-trained ResNet model. I pass the image into it. I get a feature vector or an embedding from it. And this is, again, the feature vector that I can use in my modeling. So that's how I get my textual and visual features. All right. So let's go to the modeling part and talk about some of the different models that we use. So some of the different models that we use from class are popularity, matrix factorization, FPMC, and the more advanced ones are right over here that we just talked about. So matrix factorization is very simple. It's just a dot product of the user embedding and the item embedding. It's very fast and efficient. FBMC takes us one step further by adding a previous item embedding to it. These are all very fast and interpretable, but the only cons here are that they don't take into account sequential or context information. So if you have like a sequence of 10 items, that cannot be encoded into this because this only uses like the past one item for FPMC. Then I extend this with spatiotemporal features. So the way this works is that I get an embedding for the hour of day, day of week, month, and region. And then I build this context vector that takes all that into account. So it's kind of an extension of the FPMC, but just adding more features to it. Um, However, again, the only disadvantage of this is it's still first order Markov. So it's still context is only added linearly. It doesn't work for like really long sequences. And here we go. This is the much bigger model. That's a multimodal transformer model. This one basically works by taking a user embedding that you can see on the left. There is spatiotemporal embedding, just like what I talked about last time. And then we have a sequence encoder, which is a transformer on the recent POI, so the past history of the user's visits. So the context vector comes from all of these together, from the user embedding, from the history, as well as from all the spatiotemporal features. Then for each business, we get text features and image features. So these come from reviews that each business has. And then we apply a multimodal projection where we take the text embedding and image embedding from BERT and ResNet and combine them together into one vector. And ultimately, the goal is to fuse this context vector from the user with the context vector from the business to ultimately get a final representation using the layer norm at the end. This is called a fusion gate that's done at the very end of the transformer. And then there is a scoring head at the very end that combines all these features together to decide a score. And ultimately, the ones with the highest score end up getting higher ranked. So what's being optimized here? We use the Bayesian personalized ranking for optimization. So the way this works is for every training example, we take the user, positive item, and negative item, so something that's not in the data set. And then what we want is that we want the score of a positive item to obviously be higher than the negative item, right? Because that's what is actually observed. So the way the BPR loss works is that it essentially computes this quantity. And as you can see, it incentivizes the score of the positive item to be larger and the score of the negative item to be smaller. And this effectively minimizes the loss. So it like maximizes the center here, but then you have a negative log here, so it minimizes the loss. So it essentially trains the model to prefer the correct XPOI and teaches the model how to do ranking. Before I go to evaluation, I'm gonna go over to the Jupyter Notebook again, and here are some of the different here's actually the implementation. So we have code to compute the hit and end ECG. We have code to evaluate the model. Here is code for our popularity baseline. So this one just counts the frequencies of each business. And then we have our matrix factorization, latent factor model implemented right here in PyTorch. So again, this is optimized using the loss that we just talked about earlier. And we have a couple of training iterations. And similarly, we do this for FPMC and spatiotemporal FPMC as well, implemented down here. And we again do our training loop as usual for these models as well. And yeah, and then lastly, for a transformer model that comes all the way at the end, I have the same block diagram here. And this is also implemented using these text embeddings and image embeddings that we computed earlier using BERT and ResNet. And the way this works is, again, we have a fusion gate that I talked about earlier, and our transformer model that takes all the core embeddings from the user as well as from the business, and then fuses them together to this. The optimization here is pretty much taken care of by PyTorch because it uses the Atom optimizer for that. And you can see some of the hyperparameters that I used as well. So all of this is usually tuned using the validation set that we have. So you can compute metrics on the validation set and then pick the model that has the best validation metric. For this one, I actually only trained it once here. I trained it a couple more times in a Python script that I wrote myself here because turns out training these big models in a Jupyter notebook can sometimes crash it. So I had to kind of train it separately. Um, So let's talk about the evaluation metrics. So I'm going to go over here. So for the evaluation, the way we test models is that we take every triple, we score all the items and compute these metrics and or do it over all the test interactions. For the sake of fairness, we use the same BPR loss as well as the same train validation split per user. So here is some of the results we got. And actually, one thing I want to emphasize is that this task is pretty hard because there are about 150K businesses in the data set. So you can imagine what is the probability of picking one out of 150 randomly. It's pretty small. So let's go back to the notebook and here is the final evaluation. So all the different metrics we talked about come back over here. So you can kind of see uh, our metrics being calculated for all the different models. And here is a nice plot that shows you like hit at K as well as NDCG at K across different models. So you can kind of see how Transformer performs the best. It gets in more features, which makes sense. And it also goes higher with the NDCG as well. There is one part, small extension, where you can also predict the category of the next POI. So you can actually adapt these models to do category prediction instead of actual business prediction. I'm going to skip this in this presentation just because it's very conceptually similar to everything that we did. But essentially, the idea here is we lump all the businesses into categories and then use the same model to see if it predicts the category correctly. And you can see we also have some results like this for these. I'll skip it for now in the interest of time, but hopefully this is like a nice bonus thing that you can take a look at. So lastly, let's go to the related work. So let's go next. So how has this data set been used before? So some of the previous users are involved in rating prediction, top key item recommendation, image aware recommendation, as well as like small scale POI recommendations. This is usually like restricted within like one city like Las Vegas. There's a lot of filtering done, things like that. Mine is a little different. I use all the cities across all the years. I don't do that much filtering on the data set, and I use all kinds of information, text, images, time, location, sequence. And I think that's what makes the data set really interesting is it has all those information there. It is much harder, but also a lot more realistic. Here is some information on like spatiotemporal models. So one example is a paper called on STRNN, which essentially models spatiotemporal contexts. So this is different from our FPMC model, which is much simpler compared to an RNN. But this is just another work that uses like time and distance-based transition matrices and an RNN-based approach. So this is also another really interesting way to do it. However, this paper doesn't do it on the Yelp data set. It does it on a different data set, but it's fairly close. Um, and lastly, here we have text-aware recommendations. So we have something called deep cooperative neural networks that uses two parallel CNNs and essentially combines like user review text information with item review text information. So that's kind of the overall architecture. However, the only problem here is that it's more of a rating prediction thing. It's not really good for POI prediction because it doesn't really use any like temporal information, sequential information, or anything like that. So that's the disadvantage. But it was actually tested on the Yelp data sets. That's like an interesting thing, which I think makes it a useful comparison. And VPPR, this paper uses CNN image features to model visual preference, and this extends the matrix factorization with the visual embedding space. So to make this more interesting, even though this model doesn't capture spatio-temporal dynamics, it's a pretty interesting model because of how it uses visual features. And how does this compare to our model? Our transformer model is a lot more diverse in the sense that it takes in sequential modeling, spatiotemporal, text, and visual preference. But the main differences are that it incorporates all these different things together, right? Which a lot of work in POI prediction doesn't really do. Um, so that's a lot of the related work. And just as an extension in my notebook, I've actually added some links to some papers that you can read through. And in addition, I also this is like again like a bonus extension. I implemented a small deep CONN like model. So I implemented deep CONN like model as well as a model that is like VBPR. So two additional models that we can actually use to compare against our models. So this is like a nice comparison kind of a thing. Uh, so like it's like here's the implementation in PyTorch for both of them. It pretty much follows the same math that we just talked about. And basically, what you can see is that this deep CONN performs pretty badly just because it only uses text features, doesn't use any spatial temporal features, doesn't even use any like sequence prediction, and can sometimes overfit. And then VBPR kind of performs okay-ish, like somewhere in the middle. Not as good as a transformer, but still okay-ish because again, it doesn't do the sequential stuff, but it uses image features, which still makes it really good. So I recommend taking a look at this if you got some time to see how our model performs against this. I know this isn't required for the assignment, but it's kind of a fun way to compare existing papers against our work. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I also got a collab version of this notebook that you can access right over here. And there's also the link to the slides that you can access as well. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Um, and yeah, I think you should also be able to run it. I think you might need to be a little careful about, I guess, when it comes to some of the implementation details, might need to be a little bit careful about um, the amount of RAM usage. So sometimes you might need to like adjust batch sizes and things like that depending on the RAM that's available. But otherwise, it should pretty much work out of the box. So that's it for the presentation. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching.